This right here is the Sony PlayStation 2. Time to review it. Ah yes, the mighty PlayStation 2. The single best-selling system of all time. With 155 million units worldwide. That is crazy. And it definitely deserves that title. It was many people's very first DVD player. It has probably the biggest game library of any system of all time. And overall, it's just a fantastic console. This thing made a huge splash on the scene when it first released in 2000. And its competitors, like the Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo GameCube, and Microsoft Xbox, never even came close to topping this thing in terms of sales. The PS2 was so successful that Sony manufactured it all the way up to 2013, just before the PlayStation 4 was revealed. That is crazy. Now we could talk all day about the success of the PS2 and sales figures, etc., but we got a video to do. So, some backstory of my experience with the PlayStation 2. I first had a PS2, I want to say about 2007 or 2008. It was actually a slimline PS2, which was the second model of this thing that came out in 2004. And I remember having a lot of fun with the PlayStation 2 back in the day. Some of my favorite games to play were SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, Crash Twinsanity, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy. The list goes on. I remember we also used that PS2 all the time as a DVD player whenever we went on camping trips. It was a fantastic DVD player. I later ended up getting my own PS2, which is what you see right here in 2013, which is the original fat model. And it still works surprisingly well today. There are a few quirks here and there, but they don't really affect how the system actually performs. Alright, let's show off more of this thing. So, on the very top of the PS2 you have a very sleek PS2 logo as well as the PlayStation logo all spelled out and embroidered into the console, which is a nice touch. Surrounding the console we have these grooves that surround both the top and the front of the console. It does look really nice, but I have noticed that dust tends to accumulate in these spots and it makes the console look really dirty, which is very hard to clean, by the way. Which, around 2007, Sony released an updated version of the PS2 Slim, which is what you see on screen right now. They updated the design to get rid of the grooves around the console, as well as incorporated an internal power supply, which is really nice. On the front of the console, we have a power/reset button, eject button, the disc tray, along with the PlayStation logo, which can actually be rotated depending on how you want the console to sit, whether it be this way or this way, which is pretty cool. And then we also have our two memory card slots as well as our two controller slots. We also have a FireWire port, which was phased out in later models mainly because it wasn't really used much besides for system linking, as well as two USB ports, which are USB 1.1, I want to say, so they are ungodly slow. We also have air intake vents right here, as well as on the top. On the back of the system, we have our AV multi-out port, which supports composite video, S-video, SCART/RGB, VGA, and component/D terminal. We also have a digital optical audio out port, as well as the power port. We also have a hard power switch right next to the power port, which the original PS3 model also had this. This power switch was also phased out on the slim PS2s. We also have a cooling fan right here, which is surprisingly loud on my system. I'm not entirely sure if that has something to do with the age or if it's just this specific model had a really loud fan, but I'll show you what I mean later in this video. It's surprisingly noisy. And here we have an expansion bay for expanding the system with either a network adapter or an internal hard drive. That's right, you could put a freaking hard drive in this thing. I think there was only one game that officially used it. I think it was Final Fantasy X Online, I want to say. They ended up phasing out the expansion bay in the PS2 Slimline models because one, the Slimline models already had a network adapter built in, and two, the hard drive option wasn't really needed because, as I said before, it was only used for one game. Although you can use a hard drive in this thing if you mod your system, so you can back up your save data as well as playing games right off the hard drive, which is nice. Just in case you're curious, the model of my PS2 is SCPH-39001. I can't find a manufacture date on the back of this thing, but if I were to guess when this thing was from, I want to say it was either from 2002 or 2003. Maybe even 2004 at the latest. I'm not entirely sure. Ooh, here comes my favorite part. We get to talk about what's powering this bad boy. If you don't want to listen to the nerd shit, you can skip ahead through the video. So powering the PS2 is a MIPS R5900 Emotion Engine CPU clocked at 295 megahertz. And starting with the Slimline PS2s, they bumped that clock speed up to 300 megahertz. We have 32 megabytes of RD RAM, which is the system RAM, as well as 4 megabytes of ED RAM, which is the video RAM. For the graphics chip, we have a graphics synthesizer clocked at 150 megahertz. For sound, the PS2 supports PCM 2-channel 48 kilohertz, Dolby Digital 5.1, and DTS 5.1. And finally, for video resolutions, the PS2 supports 480i, 480p, and 1080i. That's right, this thing is HD capable. Well, kind of. There weren't a whole lot of games that supported 1080i on the PS2. Two that come to mind are Gran Turismo 4 and, out of all things, Jackass the video game. There are a good chunk of games that do support 480p on the PS2, but majority of them only support 480i. So they don't look the greatest on an HD TV. And that's the main downside of the PS2. It doesn't clean up all that well on a modern TV. Mainly because the video output that they used on the PS2 is just not that great, unfortunately. Let's move on to the controller. And here it is, the DualShock 2. It's more or less the exact same as the DualShock 1, except I think the sticks are a little bigger as well as a little tighter. And the D-pad as well as the face buttons are now pressure sensitive, so they're basically analog buttons. So say, for example, you're driving in, I don't know, Need for Speed, for example. Depending on how hard you press the button is how fast you go in the game. I don't really use it all that much because it can be a little finicky sometimes, but the feature's there. Now this version of the controller I have is the smoke gray version, although I also have a black one, which is the original, as well as I think it's an aqua blue colored one. I'm not entirely sure how many console and controller colors that they made, but I'll put up a text annotation that should pop up now explaining all the colors that they made. The nice thing is, because the DualShock 2 has basically the exact same layout as the DualShock 1, it's backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1. That's awesome. And while we're on the subject of backwards compatibility, the PS2 is fully backwards compatible with PS1 games, memory cards, and controllers, which is awesome. The PS2 has features that allow it to clean up textures as well as polygons on PS1 games and make them look a little better, which is nice. I don't play a whole lot of PS1 games on my PS2, mainly because, well, the PS3 does a lot better job at doing that. Plus it upscales PS1 games, which is really nice. Moving on to games, these are the ones that I currently have in my collection. I used to have a much bigger collection, but I sold majority of my PS2 games years ago, so these are the ones that I have for now. I haven't really been collecting a whole lot of PS2 games recently, but I would like to get back into it eventually. Let's start from the top of the stack. So up first is Pimp My Ride, which is a terrible, terrible driving game based on the MTV show. And it's so bad that I don't even have the official box art for the game anymore, so I just put a piece of paper in here so I know exactly what the game is. It has a great soundtrack though, which is basically why I still have it in my collection. But yeah, awful, awful game. Don't recommend it. SSX Tricky. I played a stupid amount of this game back in high school, and it is a phenomenal snowboarding game. One of my favorite games of all time, by the way. So many great characters, and still plays really well today despite it being almost 20 years old. It's a fantastic game. Crazy Taxi. This was ported from the Dreamcast after Sega bowed out of the console race. And it's a really, really fun arcade game. The only thing about the PS2 version is that it suffers from a lot of polygon pop-in, which is kind of distracting, but it still plays perfectly fine. And plus, this version still has the official soundtrack from Offspring and Bad Religion, which is awesome. MX Unleashed. I played a crazy amount of this game growing up, and it is so much fun. It's basically a racing game where you can drive not only dirt bikes, but you can also fly helicopters, biplanes, you can also drive a freaking monster truck. It is so much fun. Also has a fantastic soundtrack. Crash Twinsanity. My first Crash Bandicoot game, as well as my favorite Crash Bandicoot game. And it's actually pretty fun. It is a little glitchy at times, mainly because this game had a pretty troublesome development. They actually make a joke in the game about how the game didn't turn out as well as they hoped and it was really rushed, which is actually kind of funny. Best thing about it, it plays at a buttery smooth 60 FPS and it controls really nice. Give this one a go. It's not the best Crash Bandicoot game, but it was one of the last good ones, or at least until the Insane Trilogy remasters that came out not too long ago. Here we have MX vs. ATV Unleashed, which is a sequel to MX Unleashed, and it's just as good. It's got a great soundtrack. You can drive even more vehicles like a golf cart. It's a really fun game. What else can I say? Gran Turismo 4, a game that I haven't played yet. It's been in my collection for the past month and I just haven't gotten around to playing it yet. I got it mainly because it's one of the few games on PS2 that plays at 1080i and I wanted to see what that would look like. That's literally the only reason I got this game. When this game first came out, it was one of the most realistic racing games on the market. And it still looks pretty good today. I recommend this one, even though Gran Turismo 5 and 6 are much better. Half-Life. That's right. This game got a console release, and this is the only console release. There was a Sega Dreamcast version that was planned, but it was ultimately canceled even though it was nearly finished. This is one of my favorite FPS games of all time, and I first played it on PS2. It doesn't have the best frame rate in the world on PS2, but it does support USB mouse and keyboard, as well as it has an exclusive co-op mode called Half-Life Decay, which only recently just got modded into the PC version. And finally we have SSX, the first one. Even though SSX Tricky tops this game in basically every department, I still really enjoy coming back to the first one every now and then. It still has all the quirky, wacky characters and still has all the super unrealistic arcadey style tricks and everything. It's still a good game. And a PS2 exclusive. Bet you didn't know that. Alright, now that I've talked your ears off long enough, let's show this thing off and see what it can do. Alright, we got everything hooked up. The power, a controller, video. Let's go. I love that startup, it's so cool. Anyways, listen how loud my PS2 is, like I was talking about earlier. It is quite noisy and a little annoying to say the least. The slim PS2s are a lot quieter, and I would like to upgrade to one of those eventually, or at least once this one dies. Also, when I was talking about quirks about my PS2 earlier in the video, the main one is the disc tray. It makes an awful grinding noise whenever it opens up, and it's kind of annoying. But hey, it plays DVDs, CDs, games perfectly fine. So as long as it works, it's really nothing to really worry about. Just to get this out of the way, I'm sorry, but I don't have a capture card, so there's really no elegant way to capture video coming from the PS2, so I'm just going to have to use the tried and true method of pointing the camera at the screen, so sorry in advance. So here's the main menu of the PS2. Pretty simplistic by today's standards. We only have two options, browser and system configuration. Browser is basically our memory card management. So if we go in here, we can manage our save data, move it over to a different memory card, or just outright delete data. We can also boot DVDs, audio CDs, as well as PS2 and PS1 games from this screen as well. But I don't have any disc in the disc tray right now, so that option isn't popping up. System configuration is exactly what it sounds like. Here we can adjust our date and time, our screen size, the digital optical audio out settings, our video output settings, and our language. Also, if you press square on this screen, you can display the background elements and have a nice little screensaver, which is a nice touch. If we press triangle on the screen, we'll go to version information. So this is where we can adjust advanced settings as well as show our version information for, say, the browser, the CD player, the PlayStation driver, or DVD player, as well as our console's model number. If we press triangle on our console information, we can turn diagnosis on or off. I'm not entirely sure what that does. I haven't really delved deep into that, but we won't worry about that. If we press triangle on PlayStation driver, we can adjust things like the disk speed as well as texture mapping. So we can basically have the disk spin faster to reduce load times, because let me tell you, PS1 games have excruciatingly long load times. And we can also smooth out textures, which is also really nice. Alright, enough showing off the main menu. Let's show off some gameplay. So just walking around here, the controller feels really nice in the hand. The analog sticks are really tight and precise. Barely any dead zone. I'm barely pressing on the analog stick and Crash is already moving, which is a good thing. The buttons also feel really nice. That's one thing I prefer the PS2 controller over the Xbox One, is because, yeah, the Xbox controller is alright, but I felt the buttons were just a little bit too clunky. These ones feel much better. Not too mushy, but not too clunky. Just right. The controller is also very, very comfortable. There's a reason why Sony didn't change the design of the PlayStation controller until the PS4. Because, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I will say, there is one thing that the PS2 does suffer from, and that's inconsistent frame rates. So, standing right here, just out in the open, the game's running at like 60 FPS, but if I turn around, the game all of a sudden drops down to 30. The PS2 was notorious for this, which is why when it comes to multi-plat games, I much prefer getting them on the Xbox or the GameCube. Alright, let's show off a game that supports progressive scan, like MX vs. ATV Unleashed. So, right off the bat, the game looks a lot better running in 480p. There aren't a whole lot of games that support 480p on PS2, unfortunately, but the ones that do look pretty damn good. Although this game does run at 1080i on the Xbox, so if you want better picture quality, I recommend playing that version of the game. I have noticed that 480p games on PS2, they do look good. but they do look slightly better on Xbox. Again, going back to the video output on the PS2, it's just not as good. But it's not awful. Also, playing a game like this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the pressure-sensitive face buttons on the PS2 controller. They do work, but I don't feel like they're as good as actual triggers on the controller. Which is why, when I play driving games, I much prefer using the Xbox controller instead of the PS2 one. Because most games will use the face buttons for acceleration, brake, etc. And that's fine, but it does tend to hurt my thumbs a lot more. The same can be said about first-person shooters on PS2. L1 and R1 as well as R2 and L2 are not pressure sensitive, so it's either all on or all off. And that can be a little annoying to some people who play first-person shooters, which is why, like I said before, I much prefer the Xbox for those kinds of games because of the analog triggers. Big jump, whee! Sick flip, man. I used to do that all the time when I was little. That was my favorite part of the game, and just watching myself wipe out at the end. Oh, it was so much fun. Alright, let's wrap it up with Gran Turismo 4. A game that, 1, I've never played before, and 2, is a game like I mentioned before in this video, one of the only titles on the PS2 that supports 1080i. And we'll be showing that off. Hopefully I can get it on camera. Okay, I gotta say, that actually looks pretty good. It's nowhere near PlayStation 3 quality, but let me tell you, for a PS2 game, that looks pretty damn good. I do kind of wish I had Jackass the video game just to see what that game would look like at 1080i, but I don't have it, unfortunately. Turn! I'm not the best at racing simulators. I'm more into the arcadey style, so I apologize for my lack of skills. One big plus about the PS2 controller, well, besides it being comfortable, is the fact that it has probably the best rumble I've ever felt in a controller. It's just so violent. Say, for example, I crash into the side right here. You like, there's some oomph behind it. Here, listen. I know that's not a good example, but you'll have to take my word for it. It's got some really good rumble. Now, I know I've heard rumors about the rumbler motors inside the PS2 are too strong, and later on these controllers start to fall apart because of that. I personally haven't had any problems with that. Maybe it's because I have good luck with controllers. I have no idea. And so, that was the PlayStation 2. Now for my final thoughts. I love the PS2. There's a good reason why Sony sold almost 160 million of these things. It's probably one of the best consoles of all time. I highly recommend picking up a PS2 if you've never owned one before. Although if you're going to get one, I would say avoid the fat models, because these ones are starting to break down nowadays, especially when it comes to the disk drive. Mine still works perfectly fine, but I'm sure its days are numbered. If you're into the modding community, then yes, pick up one of these fat PS2s, because it's the only one that supports a hard drive. But if you just want to play games, then pick up the PS2 Slim. These things are extremely common and fairly cheap nowadays. You can find a good PS2 Slim for like 50 or 60 bucks nowadays. They are very cheap. I know some PS2 titles have started to increase in price recently, but most PS2 games are still dirt cheap nowadays. So, looks like that wraps up my PlayStation 2 review. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. So if we go into browser, that's basically our memory card management. So we go in here. Should really learn to put my phone on mute.